What's up? Welcome to Journey Yourself. I'm your host, Sarah. So today we're going to do part 7 of our series on the situation in Palestine and Israel. But before I go into that, I just wanted to share some spiritual insights that I've gained from my meditation and contemplations and reading and listening to discourses from my spiritual master, Amma, and even just from observing what I've experienced in life and conversations that I've had with people. And I've noticed that there's been a recurring theme to what I've read, what I've observed in my interactions with others, counsel I've given to others, spiritual discourses that I've heard. Everything has been consistent. So one of the things I make it a point to do is to notice these recurring patterns, and I found that it's beneficial to be able to share these type of insights because these are things that everyone can benefit from. So the recurring themes that I have noticed in my interactions and everything I just laid out there is that being present is something that has come to me, and in terms of something that I need to focus on, and it's been something that when I've given counsel to others have made an emphasis on as well, is being reinforced by the spiritual readings that I've gotten. I've gotten that in my meditations. I've gotten that in the spiritual discourses that I've heard, both by my master and her Swami, is being present. And the importance of that is that most people find themselves reacting to things that have happened in the past, reliving things that have happened in the past, making decisions about things that are going on now based upon what has happened in the past. And that causes reactions that are not based upon what's happening in the particular moment. And so the reactions end up being typically not appropriate or not commensurate with the experience that one is having in that particular moment, right? And all of us can relate to and identify situations where we've been in interactions with people and have either said or done something that caused what we consider to be an extreme reaction in that moment that doesn't seem to be in tune with what happened there. And so we end up being taken aback and surprised by the other person's reaction. Or it happens vice versa. Our reaction might be a surprise to someone, because it triggered us based upon our experiences that we've had in the past. And then similarly, if we're not in the past, we're anxious about things that may end up happening in the future. And, and typically we get caught up in anxiety and worry about things that may happen that are adverse. Things that we really don't want to happen. We start to become anxious and fearful about them happening. Manifestations of self-doubt or lack of faith in ourselves. And so, we dread, what may be coming for fear that we may not get what we want. And I've made the point that fear, my definition of fear, is a manifestation of faith in a negative outcome. And then we've talked about how whatever it is that we end up focusing on and amplifying it with our emotion, we basically give it the fuel for it to come to pass. So we've talked about those things in terms of just being mindful and having awareness about what we're thinking at any given moment. But it really all comes back down to being able to be focused on the moment that we're in right now, being fully present in our interactions with people, but more importantly, really just fully present with ourselves, so that we can find ourselves being able to choose how we want to respond to any particular situation that we find ourselves in, and find the most appropriate response, rather than allowing ourselves just to react based upon what has happened in the past. This week, tomorrow, as a matter of fact, is Valentine's Day. And, depending upon what our relationship status might be, we may feel a certain way about Valentine's Day. But that emotion, whatever we feel about it, is going to be typically driven by something that we're drawing on from the past. And so, whether that was a pleasant experience that we want to have again, that we don't expect to experience tomorrow, then we could end up feeling sad and having a desire for that, and not being sad or irritated about the fact that that day is coming and we're not having that experience. Okay, which brings in the other point that has been recurring is desire, right? And so the reason that we would have the experience of feeling, a certain way about Valentine's Day or anything that we wish to have, but seems to not be manifesting in our lives at that particular moment that we want to experience it, we could end up, feeling some negative type of emotion about it, right? And end up feeling depressed or angry, frustrated, sad. But those feelings are rooted in desire, right? And we tend to be under an illusion that fulfillment of desires is going to bring us some type of happiness or pleasure. And while we may experience some temporary pleasure and satisfaction from it, um, when we really reflect on it, we don't really even feel any type of fulfillment from it. Um, and then we'll wonder why. So we may indulge in whatever it is that we desire, and depending upon what it is, we may feel remorseful for having indulged it. Like, if we, for instance, taken some type of a New Year's resolution, and then, did something pleasureful to that was contrary to what our resolution was. We'll feel frustrated, that we didn't uphold our resolution for having indulged our desire. Or, again, we indulge it and we, fully enjoy it, but realize that the satisfaction and pleasure that we got it was really fleeting. It was temporary, right? And then, we end up wanting to experience it again. Still, looking for, the satisfaction, but, really never being able to get to where we really want, feeling still that there's something missing. Or, we experienced it and then we can't have it again. And then, of course, we get frustrated. So at the root of our disappointments and negative emotions that correspond with that is our desire. But then we don't reflect to determine whether or not the desires that we have are misplaced. We don't engage in the contemplation to determine whether or not it's beneficial to have that desire. And we don't have the realization that it is the desire ultimately that ends up being our source of misery and discomfort and sadness, because it becomes from unfulfilled desires that end up creating attachments in us to where we become its slave, and then we begin to basically live to serve the fulfillment of those desires, which then never end up in turn bringing us the level of satisfaction and happiness that we really truly are seeking, because we don't realize what the true source of happiness is, and so it's important for us, if we end up finding ourselves in that type of pattern, to really be able to pull ourselves out of that cycle and bring ourselves into the current moment and engage in some contemplation as to, okay, what is it that I really want? what is it that I'm seeking? And the common thread to all of us is what we're truly seeking is the permanent happiness and peace and bliss of our connection with the divine, our connection with God. And that's really the goal of all of our spiritual pursuits. Okay, and so the primary message that I want to get from that particular insight is to, be able to take a moment to just be quiet and engage in contemplation and reflect upon, our actions and our thoughts, and be able to bring ourselves into focus on the moment that we're in, and to be able to determine, what is motivating our decisions to do the things that we do, and to evaluate whether or not they're consistent with the ultimate goals that we've set for ourselves. So with that, I want you to, just take some time to contemplate on that. And now we're going to hopefully complete at least a part of the discussion on the Israeli-Palestine situation, part 7. We have been reading from the book Facts Are Facts by Benjamin Freedman, who refers to himself as a former so-called Jew. And where we left off with him was he was basically recounting the events and circumstances that led up to World War I, and how the United States ended up getting involved in the World War, because at the time the United States was not involved in it at all. That war was fought between Russia, Turkey, and the former Ottoman Empire territories, being fought against the Germany, Italy, France, and Great Britain, England. Okay, and so where we left off was the Germany was routing, yeah, Germany was routing the I'm sorry, yeah, Germany was routing Russia in the war, and is that right? Yeah, Germany was routing Russia in the war, and they had offered a settlement, a peace settlement, to end the war, to Britain, and I think you might have to just recount the participants again. So, but before I do that, I want to just put things in context again. So, the the European Jews had formerly, just to kind of go back a bit to the Khazars, uh, the area where the Khazars were was the Upper Caucasus Mountains, and much of that area encompassed Russia and the Ukraine. And so, as we know, the Khazars had converted to Judaism, and so when that empire dissolved, those European Jews who are the descendants of the Khazars who converted to Judaism dispersed throughout that region, so which included Russia and the Ukraine. Okay, and so they inhabited Russia, and as a result of their interactions in those territories, they were basically forced out of Russia and were forced to flee. In fact, they were forced to flee through from much of Europe because they had drawn the disdain and ire from many European countries. Okay, and so as they began to end up fleeing those areas, one of the areas that they settled in was Germany. And in Germany, they did not experience the level of persecution that they had experienced in the other European countries, and so they were able to basically thrive economically. They were able to practice their culture, their newfound or converted religion in peace, and had become very successful. And so they didn't experience any resistance in Germany. That had become a very place where they were able to thrive. Okay, and so Germany was winning the war, and Russia was actually allied with Great Britain, Italy, and France. Okay, and so when it was Germany then had offered a peace treaty because they were winning the war, and had offered to just end the war and with no exchange of territories or any requirements for the settlement. So they were on the verge of accepting that. Great Britain was willing to accept the defeat, and were considering taking the peace treaty offering by the Germans. But this also coincided with the Zionist movement then being headed by Theodor Herzl, who was looking for a homeland for the former Khazars, Jews. Benjamin Freedman refers to them as Talmudists, Jews. Okay, and so although he was Zionist in his intentions in terms of wanting to find a homeland for the Jews, he was not a nationalist, as it were. And when I say nationalist, he was not really into the religion. of Judaism. He was actually more of an assimilationist, and basically wanted them to be more European-like, which was not consistent with the goals of the Talmudist Jews, who wanted to be able to leverage the story of the Jews being a chosen people, which goes back to the times when the Jewish priesthood was creating the Babylonian and Palestinian Talmuds, where they basically manufactured the story of being a chosen people. And so the Talmudist Jews of the time of World War I felt that it was beneficial to leverage off of the chosen people story in order to be able to better substantiate establishing a homeland for the Jews. And by this time, they had chosen Palestine. I think we mentioned before that Herzl first was offered Uganda. But then the Talmudist Jews, by this time now, they had joined Herzl's movement and then were moving to basically take it over. And so then that brought in people like David Ben-Gurion and Chaim Weizmann, who then who were in alliance with Lord Rothschild and Lord Balfour, who was a member with Lord Rothschild in the Round Table Group, which we discussed at one of the earlier shows. So I'm going to pick it up from that point, and we're going to read some more from the book Facts and Facts. But I felt like I needed to kind of just like establish that background before we did so. And so here we're on page 96 of the book Facts and Facts by Benjamin H. Freedman, and it says Talmudist Jews select America's ally for the First World War. It says Germany's October 1916 peace offer was on the table before the British War Cabinet. It needed only one signature to end the war. Great Britain would have quickly accepted Germany's peace offer if the World Zionist Organization had not interfered. The British War Cabinet was then taking their instructions from the Talmudists in London. When the British War Cabinet decided to accept Germany's peace offer, the World Zionist Organization offered to railroad the United States into the war in Europe as Great Britain's ally if Great Britain promised the Talmudists of the world Palestine as compensation after Germany's defeat with the United States as an ally. Talmudist pressure in London and New York prevailed. President Wilson had little choice in the matter, it seemed. And I'll stop there by just kind of reviewing a little bit where we talked about the basic blackmailing that Woodrow Wilson experienced, which ended up compelling him to agree with those terms because he had an affair with a professor's wife while he was teaching at the same college, who said that she needed some like $40,000 to pay off some debt that she owed, and so she went to or sent someone to Woodrow Wilson to collect that amount. and if not, that she would make known uh, their affair. And the the messenger was one Bernard Baruch, who, after being told that Woodrow Wilson didn't have money, he offered to basically put up the money on his behalf if he would agree to bring the United States into World War One, and then he did so on the false pretense that Germany had attacked this United States ship. I believe it was called the USS Sussex. Okay, so it said President Wilson had little choice in the matter. It seemed he was the captive of circumstances in his early life that cannot be altered, and that's what they were referring to in terms of those circumstances. His April 2nd, 1919 address to Congress was about to decide the fate of the world. Congress, without hesitation, declared war against Germany for him. The Germans, attributing their crushing defeat in World War I to the entry of the United States in the war in Russia as Great Britain's ally, Germany considered the October 1916 London Agreement a stab in the back by the Talmudists of the world. In view of the Emancipation Edict in Germany, 1822, Germans regarded the London Agreement as a double cross by Talmudists in Germany. Quota systems then existed in all other countries in Europe, but there was no quota system in Germany after the Emancipation Edict of 1822 for the Talmudist Jews. It says, Talmudist Jews promote Germans' victory, then stab them in the back. The Kaiser provided the World Zionist Organization with their offices for their world headquarters in Berlin. He and his family and government officials were constantly extending assistance to Theodor Herzl. Germany extended opportunities to Talmudists as not available in other European countries. The Kaiser himself arranged a personal meeting between the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire and Theodor Herzl. Blackroder and Company in Berlin were the private bankers of the Kaiser family for generations. They were Talmudists. Warburg and Company of Hamburg were the world's largest merchant bankers. And I think we mentioned that Paul Warburg, as a side note, was the first president of the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States. So they were Talmudists. The head of the German General Electric Company, then the world's largest industrial enterprise, was also a Talmudist. The head of the Hamburg, American and North American Lloyd steamship companies, the two largest steamship companies in the world, second only to the Cunard Line, was a Talmudist. And when he says Talmudist, he's referring to the Khazar descendant Jews who converted. Countless prominent German industrialists, bankers, and merchants were Talmudists. The attitude of Germans towards Talmudists in Germany and throughout the world worsened much after the October 1916 stab in the back by the Talmudists. Mr. Samuel Landman, the secretary of the World Zionist Organization in London from 1917 to 1922, wrote in his Great Britain, The Jews in Palestine, published in London in 1936 on page 6, the fact that it was the Jewish help that brought the USA into the war on the side of the Allies has rankled ever since in Germany, especially Nazi minds, and has contributed in no small measure to the prominence with which anti-Semitism occupied in the Nazi program. The sentiments of prominent German leaders were expressed in the Jewish Daily Bulletin of New York City on October 30th, 1934, in an article reprinted on page 3 from the Jewish Telegraphic Agency dispatch from Berlin, which stated, "The new Germany persists towards the complete extermination of the Jew because it was Jews who instigated the United States to enter the World War, accomplishing the defeat of Germany who later caused the inflation in Germany. Okay, and so they're basically pointing out that the anti-Jewish sentiment in Germany was in response to the Talmudist Jews convincing the United States to enter the war against Germany, ultimately resulting in their defeat, which they again considered to be a backstab against them because they were so hospitable to the Jews while they inhabited Germany, which ended up fueling the rise to power of one Adolf Hitler. Okay, but this is, even before the rise of the Nazis. It says, Richard Kuntz, a leading Nazi parliament figure, declared at a mass meeting in Magdeburg yesterday, Talmudists throughout the world made bad matters worse on August 7, 1933, when they declared their holy war to destroy the German nation by destroying their export trade upon which their very existence depends. Under the leader of Mr. Samuel Untermyer, Talmudists of the world declared a world boycott on all German goods and services. They asked their Christian friends to join the worldwide boycott of German goods and services. Mr. Samuel Untermyer arranged for the International Boycott Conference in Amsterdam in July 1933. There he was elected the president of the World Jewish Economic Federation. Talmudists throughout the world had tried in vain in 1919 to silence German resentment against them for railroading the United States into the war in Europe without justification or provocation by the United States as Great Britain's ally. Talmudists were held responsible for Germany's defeat and for every disadvantage that resulted from that defeat. The New York Times of August 1933 published the Talmudists' declaration of their holy war against Germany in a 3-column report of Mr. Untermyer's address to the nation from CBS studio on the night of his arrival home from Europe. Mr. Untermyer, among other things, stated, "Holy war in which we are embarked is a war which must be waged unremittently. The Jews are the aristocrats of the world. The economic boycott against all German goods, shipping, and services. Boycott is our only really effective weapon. Bring the German people to their senses by destroying their export trade on which their very existence depends. We shall force them to learn. It is not sufficient that you buy no goods in Germany. You must refuse to deal with any merchant or shopkeeper who sells any German-made goods. We will drive that last nail in the coffin." That statement was made on August 7, 1933, when not a hair on the head of a Talmudist Jew in Germany had been touched. Germany was plunged into a depression difficult to describe in a few words. Germany's export business suddenly ending as if by magic. Talmudists hoped that way to stop Germans from continuing to talk about why they lost the war. Talmudists in Germany were finding it difficult to live that down. Germans then felt the way Sir Winston Churchill in 1936 expressed himself about the entry of the United States into the World War I in 1917. Since German or Zionist worldwide boycott against German merchandise creates a domestic crisis. The eminent Rabbi Maurice L. Perlman, head of the British section of the World Jewish Congress, stated to a Canadian audience, as reported by the Toronto Evening Telegram of February 26, 1940, that the World Jewish Congress has been at war with Germany for 7 years. Senator Wayne Morris of Oregon delivered an address on December 20th, 1951, as reported in the National Jewish Post of Indianapolis on December 28, 1951, in which he stated, "One of the major causes of our going to war against Hitler was the persecution of Jews in Germany." Dr. Donald C. Blaisdell, professor of government at the College of the City of New York, published an important document entitled American Policy for the Near East in a publication called Issues, published in New York, the official organ of the American Council for Judaism in the fall issue in 1959, in which Dr. Blaisdell stated, "No minority of Irish, German, of Poland, of Polish, Italian, or Greek extraction has been able to manipulate policy to its advantage as has the Zionist leaders of American Jews. Nor does there appear to be any politically feasible means in which the American government can place the claims of its important clientele in proper perspective. Like American Jews who are presumed to be members of Israel's American clientele are never allowed to forget it, so the American government, Congress, and executive branch alike is never permitted to free itself from the pressure, propaganda, and power emanating from the same Zionist sources." Benjamin Freedman goes on to say, he says, this author, meaning himself, has been in a position since 1912 to witness what was going on behind the scenes. He says he served on the National Democratic Committee in the 1912 campaign that elected President Wilson to his first term. And he says no doors have been closed to him since then. He said he was ushered into this world by Dr. Simon Baruch, the father of Bernard Baruch. Freeman says that he, at that time, was a good friend of Bernard Baruch, and Bernard Baruch would often consult with him about the situation. Okay, now he goes on to say that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was also manipulated by Talmudist Jews. He says President Franklin D. Roosevelt was a captive of the Talmudists from the time he went to Albany as governor of the state of New York. President Roosevelt was long beholden to the Talmudists. The story of how President Roosevelt led the United States into the desperate predicament in which the United States today finds itself in the Middle East is not a long story. It's the story of how President Roosevelt railroaded the United States into the Second World War. Germany and Poland had agreed upon a formula giving Germany access across the Danzig corridor. President Wilson in 1919 had created the Danzig corridor, which separated Germany into two halves. In order to keep Germany weak, at the instigation of the Talmudists at the Versailles Peace Conference, President Wilson cut Germany into two halves separated by a strip of German territory granted to Poland, which divided Germany into two halves. I think that repeated itself. The inconveniences, the delays, and the annoyances to Germany and Poland had finally worked out the acceptable arrangement that eliminated a majority of Germans' objections to the Danzig corridor. Germany and Poland reached a basis that would serve to prevent Germany's resort to more aggressive action. Adolf Hitler was the head of the German government at the time. Talmudists throughout the world opposed the peaceful adjustment between Germany and Poland of the Danzig corridor situation. Unrestricted access of traffic between the western half and the eastern half of Germany will soon make Germany again the most powerful country in the world. Talmudists throughout the world dreaded that thought. In spite of the difficulties placed in the way of reaching a solution for the Danzig corridor problem, Germany and Poland finally agreed upon a formula. Preparations were being made to consummate their understanding of the treaty. Both Germany and Poland were satisfied the formula agreed upon served both governments. Shortly before the agreement with Germany was to be signed, Poland secretly signed a treaty with Great Britain dated August 25, 1939. Great Britain agreed in that treaty to hasten the military assistance of Poland with all the support and assistance in its power if Poland were attacked by Germany. With that assurance from Great Britain, Poland broke off negotiations with Germany. So basically the same thing happened with with the settlement, or basically the breaking off of the peace agreement that was proposed in World War One. Basically, the same thing ended up happening as a settlement of World War II was about to ensue, where after intercession from the Talmudist Jews, Poland broke off their peace talks with Germany, and says Germany didn't understand the reason for Poland's sudden change of mind and decided to proceed with the terms of the arrangement agreed upon with Poland. And that was the start of World War II. Great Britain knowingly, and I think I misspoke, so the war hadn't started yet, but they were basically coming to terms on an agreement between Poland to normalize relations between the two halves of Germany, and so Poland ended up reneging on that agreement once they got assurance from Great Britain that they would provide military assistance. Okay, so Great Britain knowingly deceived Poland when Great Britain actually promised military assistance to Poland if Poland were attacked by Germany. Great Britain could not come to Poland's assistance, and Great Britain knew it when Great Britain's offer of military assistance to Poland was made. Poland fell into Great Britain's trap and discontinued negotiations with the Germans. Poland's unexplained discontinuance of negotiations with Germany to complete the Danzig Corridor Agreement resulted in Germany's troops moving into the Danzig Corridor without an agreement with Poland. Great Britain knew exactly what would take place in that event, that it would mean the beginning of World War II. The rest is history. Talmudists of the world welcomed the war against Germany in 1999 to somehow crush the Nazi government, as the Talmudists of the world crushed Germany in World War I in 1917 by railroading the United States into the war in Europe as Great Britain's ally. President Roosevelt tried his hardest in 1939 to railroad the United States into the war in Europe to accommodate the Talmudists in the United States. Germany learned by experience in World War I that the entry of the United States into the war in Europe in 1939 would prove equally disastrous to Germany if the United States were railroaded into the war in Europe as Great Britain's ally again. Germany exercised extraordinary caution not to provide the United States with justification under international law to declare war against Germany. That situation presented Roosevelt with a problem. President Roosevelt decided if it were impossible for him to get into the war in Europe through the front door, that he would railroad the United States into the war in Europe through the back door. Through the back door meant through Japan. President Roosevelt finally did railroad the United States into the war in Europe through the back door through Japan. It says Secretary of Defense Stimson, and we're on page 101 of the book Facts Are Facts. Secretary of Defense Stimson during World War II makes a startling revelation. Germany and Japan had a treaty under which if either Germany or Japan were attacked by a third power, the country which was not attacked by the third power automatically is at war with that third power. President Roosevelt planned to provoke Japan, so Japan would attack the United States. Japan in 1941 attacked Pearl Harbor. The United States immediately declared war against Japan and automatically was at war with Germany. The personal diary of the Honorable Mr. Henry Simpson and all his papers are in Yale University Library. Mr. Simpson each day entered into his personal diary in his own handwriting the important events of his life that day. Mr. Simpson was President Roosevelt's Secretary of Defense, and Mr. Simpson's diary was introduced as evidence in the United States Senate investigation of the Pearl Harbor attack by Japan over the strong objections of friends of President Roosevelt. Mr. Simpson entered into his diary on November 25, 1941, 2 weeks before Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, that a meeting with President Roosevelt and his cabinet that morning at the White House, President Roosevelt told those present that he wished to be at war against Japan, but that he did not want it to appear that the United States fired the first shot. Zionist conspirators provoked Pearl Harbor incident. President Roosevelt knowingly provoked Japan to attack the United States, contends Benjamin Freedman. He says President Roosevelt advised Japan that they could purchase no more steel scrap or oil from the United States. Japan was in the midst of a war against China. Without scrap steel and without oil, Japan would be unable to continue that war. Japan was totally dependent upon the United States for both steel scrap and oil. Professor Charles Callan-Tinzel, professor of diplomatic history at Georgetown University in Washington, wrote a classic work he called Backdoor to War, published by Henry Regnery of Chicago in 1952. Professor Townsend spent 5 years after the war in the confidential files of the State Department doing research there on World War II. Professor Townsend's book has 652 pages, all filled with alarming authenticated facts little known to the public during the war, and still now. In a scholarly detailed manner, easily understood, Professor Townsend supplies facts which are incontrovertible proof, showing how President Roosevelt railroaded the United States into the World War II in Europe. President Roosevelt's desire to please Talmudists among his friends influenced his better judgment. He overlooked that he was president of all people in the United States. President Roosevelt realized that if he expected political support by Talmudists in the United States to continue, he must find some way to railroad the United States into the war then in progress in Europe against Germany. Surely nobody can no longer question that railroading the United States in World War II was President Roosevelt's contribution to the desperate predicament in which the United States today finds itself in the Middle East. President Harry S. Truman made his great contribution to the desperate predicament in the Middle East when he recognized a sovereign state an unarmed uprising in Palestine by 800,000 armed aliens transplanted into Palestine in a conspiracy organized out by Talmudists throughout the world. President Truman in 1946 suffered from a pathological obsession that he must be elected President of the United States in 1948 on his own account. Mr. Clark M. Clifford, Secretary of War under President Lyndon B. Johnson, deserves a great deal of credit for the recognition of the State of Israel on May 14, 1948 by the United States. Mr. Elihu Epstein, the United States representative of the Jewish Agency in Washington in 1948, told the story in his 3-page article in the Jewish Chronicle of London in its 10th anniversary issue of June 1958, celebrating the 10th anniversary of the founding of the State Israel. Mr. Clifford undoubtedly was anxious to help because President Truman had confided in his close friends that he wished to recognize the Zionist state in the first hour of its birth as he did. The State of Israel was officially proclaimed in Tel Aviv at midnight on May 14, 1948. President Truman recognized the birth of the State of Israel 11 minutes after midnight. President Truman finally advised his author, that being Benjamin Freedman, that he did not wish to carry on the discussion of the Zionist question with him any further. He wrote to Freedman that he had turned over the entire Palestine question to the Honorable David Niles. Talmudists were willing to carry out their part of the bargain with President Truman after he recognized the State of Israel. Although the odds in President Truman's election in 1948 were 20-1 against his election, President Truman romped home the winner over Governor Dewey, assisted by the invisible and invincible Zionist political steamroller, and always elects their candidates. President Truman not only used the power and prestige of the United States to compel the United Nations to admit the state of Israel as a peace-loving nation, the regime of an armed uprising in Palestine by transplanted aliens, but he made billions of United States taxpayer dollars available to Talmudists to make the state of Israel powerful, which continues to this day. When the day to vote for the admission of the state of Israel arrived, they were short 2 votes. The plan was about to collapse. In the emergency, Mr. Charles A. Silver engaged Cardinal Spellman to make 2 trips to South America to change their votes in the United Nations against the admission of the state of Israel into the United Nations to vote in favor of the admission of the state of Israel into the United States as a member. The newspapers around the world on June 11, 1964 published Mr. Silver's confession of a secret I have kept for 15 years. The secret Cardinal Spellman kept with Mr. Silver was that Cardinal Spellman was sent to South America by Mr. Silver on behalf of the Talmudists in New York to persuade the South American countries to change their votes against admitting the state of Israel to the United States to voting in favor of admitting the state of Israel to the United Nations as a member. This author, again being Benjamin Freedman, was a close personal friend of Cardinal Spellman for 25 years. Cardinal Spellman confessed to Freedman several years ago that he felt he had committed an irreparable sin by conspiring with the Talmudists in the United States to elect the state of Israel a member of the United Nations. In the midst of that bloody fighting in the Middle East in June 1967, Cardinal Spellman told Benjamin Freedman, when alone with him in his study, that he felt personally responsible for all the lives lost in the 1967 invasion of the United Arab Republic in Syria by the state of Israel. Okay, he goes on to talk further about how Dwight D. Eisenhower also contributed to the circumstances in the so-called Middle East. He said, Talmudists in the United States pressured President Eisenhower into sponsoring a joint resolution by Congress of H.J. Resolution 117 on January 5, 1950, which was then refined by Congress to the Committee on Foreign Affairs. President Eisenhower knew less about what he was doing than a newborn babe. It was pitiful for this author, that being Benjamin Freedman, to witness the great general being figuratively pushed around by the Talmudists unfit to shine his shoes. President Eisenhower was always friendly towards Freedman. Let's see, we'll skip ahead. He says he met President Eisenhower when he was being considered by Thomas M. Watson as a presidential candidate on a Democratic ticket. Mr. Watson was the founder of IBM. He told Freedman at the time that he believed General Eisenhower as a civilian would make a great president. As President of the United States, General Eisenhower was faithful to these Talmudist supporters whose friendship he cultivated first in Europe during his political activities in Germany after the end of World War II. Talmudists curried his favor after World War II. They knew that as a president of the United States, General Eisenhower, in their hands, would be like clay in the hands of a potter. In 1956, it appeared that Middle East countries were undergoing changes in their governments. The Zionist illegal occupation of Palestine still existed. Populations in Middle East countries were growing restless. Talmudists recognized something must be done to silence the unrest. President Eisenhower then obliged the Talmudists. Lebanon is the heart of the Middle East political activity. To nip action in the bud by native populations aiming to assert their independence from domination by the Talmudists arranged with President Eisenhower to occupy Lebanon with 14,000 troops and to station the Sixth Fleet off the coast. To make it legal, Talmudists had Congress pass a joint resolution like the Tonkin Bay Resolution passed by Congress to legalize the war in Vietnam. It says President Eisenhower occupied Lebanon with 14,000 troops, and President Eisenhower was warning the Middle East nations not to attempt to regain Palestine from the Zionists who were in illegal possession of Palestine. It says Eisenhower must have had a consortium of the smartest Talmudists, the State Department and Justice Departments prepare that joint resolution. The intent of the unclear language is to conceal the purpose of the joint resolution, not to explain its purpose. The purpose was to have a joint resolution in record that would permit President Eisenhower to use the United States Armed Forces and Navy to aid and abet the Zionist thieves to hold on to their stolen loot without any necessity to ask Congress to declare war. He says every word President Eisenhower uttered to defend the crooks and occupation of Palestine was a lie, which contributes to the situation in the Middle East. Talmudists in the United States were able to camouflage their illegal aggression in the Middle East behind the glamour of President Eisenhower's record as a great soldier. He goes on to talk about how President Kennedy also contributed to the circumstances. It says that President Kennedy's future was uncertain after digressing on August 25th, 1960, from the straight and narrow path he had followed all his life. President Kennedy could not escape the consequences of his betrayal of the high principles to which he had aimed to dedicate his life. President Kennedy surrendered to the lure of the Talmudists who pledged to put him in the White House as President of the United States. On October 23rd, 1960, in the United States, Senate Office Building in Washington, President Kennedy, at the time a senator, gave Benjamin Freedman a copy of the address he was delivered in New York City on August 25th, 1960. In the copy of that address, he stated, amongst other things, Israel 3 weeks ago, I said in a public statement, Israel is here to stay. My flat prediction that Israel is here to stay will endure and flourish, a special obligation of the Democratic Party. He says it was President Truman who first recognized the new state of Israel and gave it status in world affairs, and may I, and my hope and my pledge to continue the Democratic tradition. If the Democratic platform is to have any meaning, the White House must take the lead. American intervention will not now be easy. I propose that we make it crystal clear we will act promptly and decisively. I propose that we make it clear our guarantee that we will act with whatever force and speed are necessary, the risk of war. So essentially, President Kennedy was giving the Talmudist Jews his pledge that as President of the United States, that he would send sons, husbands, and brothers of the grassroots population of the United States to fight in Palestine under the flag of the United States in a war in Palestine to help them hold on to the land that they stole. Benjamin Freedman says he met with President Kennedy for the first time in his father's office at 230 Park Avenue in New York City on the day he was elected for the first time as congressman in 1946. And he met with his father, Joseph Kennedy, and Judge Landis, who was an associate. So he's basically saying he knew them well. But basically, he's underscoring the power that the Zionist Ashkenazi Jews have wielded and the influence that they've had over politics in the United States, which ended up being a significant boon to the intent to establish and maintain the illegitimate state of Israel in the land of Palestine. Okay. We'll go on. We're skipping ahead. in the book to page 112, where he talks about the hidden hand and how it controls the U.S. vote in the United Nations. It says, the 125 other members of the United Nations know the United States was as crooked as a corkscrew to recognize the so-called State of Israel as a lawful representative government of the indigenous population. The other nations of the world all know this by this time, that the Talmudists elect the presidents of the United States and members of Congress. If these Talmudists in the United States were paupers, they could not elect a dog catcher in the United States. And so he's basically saying there that their wealth has afforded them control over the political system in the United States. And we know, particularly now, with the what was that? There was a Supreme Court case that basically allowed unlimited lobbying money in finance of political campaigns. What's it called? United. The name escapes me, but there was a Supreme Court ruling that basically allowed unlimited lobbying money. So the monetary control of the political parties is much more overt than it was back in those days. Okay. Continued on page 112, it says the Rothschild conspiracy fulfilled. The so-called State of Israel is positive that the United States must, at the request of the State of Israel, veto any resolution introduced in the Security Council to expel the so-called State of Israel. Consequently, the so-called State of Israel feels as smug as a bug in a rug, regardless of what they do. The Talmudists control the delegation in the United States. Nobody but a fool or an ignoramus doubts that today. The Talmudists always instruct the delegates in the United States how to vote in the Security Council. Okay, so again, they're making a point to underscore the power that the Jews have in the United States. He says the arch villains behind the world's difficulty are the Rothschilds, who again we talked about as being the part of the Roundtable Group, and who exerts significant financial control over the world. Through their control over the central banks throughout the world, including the United States, with the Federal Reserve being founded by one of the agents of Rothschild, Paul Warburg, which I mentioned earlier. Let's see if there's anything else. Okay, here they talk about some of the strategic value of the Suez Canal to the Rothschilds. So he says the extent of the Rothschild wealth cannot be estimated with any degree of certainty. A conservative guess that the total value of the Rothschild fortunes would be in billions of dollars, if that amount could be imagined. The important thing is the major portion of this wealth is in the Far East. The Rothschild interests in Europe and the Western Hemisphere are tremendous. However, in comparison to their wealth in the Far East, it is significant. The most vital single thing in the world to the Rothschild dynasty is access to the Far East. Access to the Far East through the Mediterranean is known as Great Britain's lifeline. The Rothschild dynasty had plunged Great Britain into many wars only to preserve their lifeline to the Far East. History tells that story. The Suez Canal was not constructed by the Rothschilds. They did their utmost to prevent its construction. The Suez Canal was constructed by the Frenchmen, the Lesseps, and the Khedive of Egypt. The Rothschilds refused to invest 1 cent of their money in the company which obtained the concession to construct the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal was completed in 1869. It, from the very start, proved a great success. The Rothschilds swindled a 40% interest in the Suez Canal Company from the Khedive of Egypt. They found a 40% interest insufficient for their purpose, as the value of the Suez Canal had been demonstrated after it was in use for 2 years. The Rothschilds decided they must control their lifeline to the fortune in the Far East. Without justification or provocation of any description, the Rothschilds had Great Britain occupy Egypt exactly as a defeated power is occupied by the victor. The British ran the schools, the banks, railroads, of course, and Egypt ceased to be Egypt except in name. Naturally, the Suez Canal came under complete control of Great Britain. The original concession for the Suez Canal was for 99 years. The more important the Suez Canal became to the Rothschilds, the more Rothschilds worried what was going to happen when the 99-year concession for the Suez Canal expired in 1969 and reverted to Egypt as a concession provider. Great Britain spent large fortunes and spilled much blood in many wars to maintain uninterrupted, undisturbed possession of the Suez Canal. The Rothschilds knew that Egypt would be free to grant a new concession for the Suez Canal to a power unfriendly to Great Britain, like France, Germany, or Russia when the concession expired. The Rothschilds feared the consequences should the Suez Canal fall into the hands of an unfriendly power, and Great Britain had many powers in mind who could make use of the Suez Canal politically also against the great empire. It says the Rothschilds in London promised the Zionists unlimited financial assistance with which to develop Palestine, but on one condition, that as soon as Palestine was turned over to the Zionists, they applied for admission to the British Empire as a member. The Rothschilds planned to construct a canal on Palestine from Ashkelon on the Mediterranean to Aqaba on the Gulf of Aqaba. They planned to construct a modern steel and concrete canal with 2 lanes for ships. The canal would be on British territory in perpetuity, enjoying the advantage of a defense by Great Britain if needed, and international recognition as a member of the British Empire. Great Britain occupied Palestine from 1921 to 1948 as the mandatory of the League of Nations. During that period, the British Empire fell apart. By the time the Zionists established a Zionist state in Palestine, the British Empire had fallen apart and no longer existed. Palestine and the Zionists could not apply for admission to the British Empire because there was no British Empire. When the Rothschilds realized what was happening, they were compelled to alter their plans. The Rothschilds were determined that Great Britain must turn over Palestine to the Zionists for a sovereign Zionist state. The idea of a United Nations was then a reality, and the Rothschilds planned upon getting the sovereign Zionist state admitted to the United Nations. The United Nations would provide Palestine with the same advantages that the British Empire would have provided once upon a time. If a sovereign Zionist state could be admitted to the United Nations, Palestine's future would be assured. The Rothschilds then didn't know what to do. Then in October 1916, the World Zionist Organization entered the picture. When Great Britain was considering surrendering to Germany, the World Zionist Organization and the British War Cabinet entered into the October 1916 London Agreement. So they're showing basically Rothschild being a hidden hand in in the Zionist plan to get the United States involved in World War I. It says when Great Britain was considering surrender to Germany, the World Zionist Organization under the British War Cabinet entered into the 1916 London Agreement, which was the agreement to bring the United States into the war. The Rothschild dynasty was astonished when, on April 6, 1917, the United States declared war against Germany. By July 1917, it appeared that Germany would be defeated after the entry of the United States into the war. The Rothschild dynasty sought out Mr. Chaim Weizmann and cultivated his friendship. Now, I mentioned Chaim Weizmann earlier. He basically took over the Zionist movement from Theodore Herzl. The Rothschild dynasty sought out Mr. Chaim Weizmann and cultivated his friendship. The Rothschilds realized that the World Zionist organization must be recognized. The Rothschilds purchased a Prince Albert frock coat and a silk hat for Mr. Chaim Weizmann and treated him as though he was already the head of the government of Palestine, which he eventually became. The Rothschilds renewed their interest in the plan to finance the Zionist movement in Palestine in exchange for the concession to construct their modern canal across Palestine in competition with the Suez Canal. Great Britain was certain to defeat Germany, again, once the United States had agreed to enter the war, and Great Britain had agreed to turn over Palestine to the Talmudists, or the Jews, as a result of the agreement for the United States to enter into the war. It says the only missing link now was the existence of Palestine. The only missing link now was the existence in Palestine of an independent, sovereign Zionist state. The Rothschilds financed transplanting 600,000 Eastern European Talmudist Jews into Palestine and arranged to remove the last of General Allenby's 200,000 British troops from Palestine. In collaboration with President Truman of the United States, the armed $600,000 transplanted alien Talmudist Jews on May 18, 1948, began their expulsion from Palestine of the Christian and Muslim disarmed and defenseless 1.35 million population, and at the same time declared their armed uprising the State of Israel. The Rothschilds were now satisfied. The only unfinished business was to force the Middle East nations to recognize the State of Israel. The Rothschilds commenced their final stage by building the present oil pipeline from Ashkelon on the Mediterranean to Aqaba along the route of their future modern, long-planned steel and concrete two-lane canal. The Middle East situation is a result of Rothschild's efforts to secure permanent and secure access to the Far East. This nonsense about the repatriation of God's chosen people to their promised land has been revealed as the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on mankind. The single purpose of the Rothschilds was to secure permanent and secure access to the vast natural resources in the Far East. I would say that that's not the only or single purpose. Freedman goes on to say he had the time, patience to inform several presidents of the United States about the underlying reason for the Middle East aggression and by the Talmudists throughout the world. He said he spent fortunes trying to educate different political leaders, and including a number of presidents. and he spent most of his fortune. Benjamin Freedman was pretty well to do, but he spent a lot of his fortune trying to educate the people throughout the United States and other politicians about the behind the scenes machinations of the Talmudists Jews and about the control that they have over the United States government and the influence that they've had throughout the world, and how they ended up financing or contributing to the establishment of the State of Israel in Palestine, with financing coming from the Rothschild family, which, as we pointed out, is connected to the Round Table Group secret society started by Cecil Rhodes, and they are committed to creating Anglo-Saxon Zionist rule throughout the world. Okay, and so that Round Table Group is basically an alliance between Anglo-Saxons and Zionist powers to essentially control world affairs, which we see being manifested even to this day. Okay, and so we've concluded finally our read from the book Facts Are Facts, but there's more to this saga, but I need to do a bit more research from the book, the other book that I was reading by Douglas Reed. So we'll pick it up from that particular book. The name of it is what is that name of that book? Just give me a minute. Okay, so we'll pick it up from the book, The Controversy of Zion, Douglas Reed. But this is a pretty long book, so I'm not going to read that one like I did from the book Facts Are Facts, which is a small book. But I'm basically going to need to spend some time studying and delving into the book Controversy of Zion to bring further light to this subject. All right, so with that, I hope that you found this informative, and I would also encourage you to go to YouTube, listen to the previous shows of mine, but also to go to Curry Mayo of Wild's website and listen to the series that he produced called the Don't Mention the Khazars, or I think he spells it Chazars, but do listen to his series, Don't Mention the Khazars, on Corey Mayo Wild's website, YouTube channel, and he has, you will find that the latest edition to be further informative, and I have some of the information that he uses in order to do his video. I haven't seen and listened to the latest one, but I know what it's about, and I have some of that same source material where he has people basically laying out the plan for Anglo-Saxon Zionist rule, particularly from the Zionist perspective. So we'll think about whether we want to go into that, but that's really powerful information. But I'll just point out that that is what we see manifesting in current world affairs, and we do see those basically all political power, media power, financial power has essentially been consolidated and has manifested itself in the level of control that is being exerted throughout the world, and in particular here in the United States. So again, I hope you found this to be informative. I do encourage you to read the books that we've read from. The source materials that we've covered are from the books Facts Are Facts by Benjamin H. Freedman. That's a very quick read. And then I encourage you to get the book, very extremely informative book, The Controversy of Zion. You'll also want to read the book Chosen People from the Caucasus by Michael Bradley. And you would also want to read the book about the Khazars, the 13th tribe, by Arthur Koestler. Okay, and so those 4 books you will find very informative about this subject, and will arm you with great information to, if you ever engage in a discussion about this situation, you will be well armed with facts to discuss it. So with that, I want to end. Thank you for joining yourself. Hope you found this to be informative. We'll talk to you again on the next episode of Journey into Self. What's up?